There comes a moment in the journey of many chosen ones when something subtle but powerful shifts inside them. It is not always dramatic at first, and it rarely arrives with a clear announcement. Instead, it unfolds gradually through a growing awareness that the dynamics you once accepted without question no longer affect you the same way. Situations that once pulled you into stress, guilt, or emotional confusion begin losing their grip on your mind. The tactics people once used to influence your decisions, your emotions, and your reactions suddenly stop working with the same effectiveness. For many people walking a path of spiritual awakening, this moment becomes a quiet but unmistakable turning point. In earlier stages of life, it is common to move through relationships and environments without fully recognizing the subtle ways influence and manipulation operate.
Many people grow up believing they must constantly explain themselves, keep everyone happy, and avoid disappointing others at all costs. This belief system can make someone vulnerable to emotional pressure, guilt-driven expectations, and the constant pull of other people's demands. You may have once found yourself saying yes to things that drained your energy, simply because you felt responsible for maintaining peace. You may have tolerated behavior that crossed your boundaries because you believed patience meant enduring everything silently. In those earlier stages, emotional manipulation often works precisely because it operates below the surface of conscious awareness. It can appear as guilt disguised as concern, criticism disguised as advice, or pressure disguised as love. Over time, these patterns can shape how a person sees themselves and how they respond to others. But awakening introduces a different level of clarity into your life. As awareness grows, you begin noticing patterns that once went unnoticed. Conversations that once seemed normal begin revealing subtle emotional tactics underneath them. Situations that once left you feeling confused now appear far more predictable. Instead of reacting automatically, you start observing what is actually happening beneath the surface of a moment. This shift in awareness is one of the earliest signs that something deeper is changing within you. Awakening is often described as a spiritual experience, but it is also a profound psychological transformation. It is the moment when your mind becomes capable of seeing dynamics that previously operated in the background of your life. You begin recognizing how certain interactions rely on emotional triggers. You start noticing how some people attempt to guide your decisions by appealing to guilt, obligation, or fear of disapproval. These realizations do not necessarily make you angry or resentful. In fact, many chosen ones describe the opposite experience. Instead of reacting emotionally, they begin responding with calm awareness. The clarity itself becomes enough to change how they move through these situations. One of the most powerful aspects of awakening is that it shifts your internal center of control. When someone operates primarily from external approval, their emotions and decisions can easily be influenced by the expectations of others. But when awareness grows, your sense of direction begins moving inward. Instead of constantly asking whether others approve of your choices, you begin asking whether your actions align with your values, your growth, and the path God is guiding you toward. This internal shift quietly changes the entire dynamic of how influence works in your life. Manipulation relies heavily on unconscious reactions. It depends on someone feeling responsible for another person's emotions or feeling afraid of disappointing them. It often works by creating urgency, guilt, or confusion, so that the person being influenced reacts quickly rather than thinking clearly. But when awareness increases, those automatic reactions begin slowing down. You pause, you observe, you recognize the pattern that is unfolding in front of you. And in that moment of awareness, the tactic loses much of its power. This is why many people around someone who is awakening begin sensing that something has changed, even if they cannot immediately explain what it is. The same conversations no longer produce the same reactions. The same emotional triggers no longer create the same response. The chosen one, who once felt easily pulled into drama or obligation, now carries a quiet calm that is difficult to disrupt. This does not mean you've become distant or uncaring. It means you have become aware. And awareness changes everything.
When God begins opening your eyes to the deeper patterns operating in your life, you start seeing both people and situations more clearly. You recognize where influence is healthy and supportive, and where it becomes controlling or manipulative. Instead of reacting impulsively, you begin responding intentionally. This is the moment when manipulation begins losing its influence over you. It is not because you are fighting against it, arguing with it, or trying to defeat it. It is because you can see it. Awareness itself becomes the turning point. And once awareness reaches that level, the entire game changes. The tactics that once worked easily begin failing because they rely on blindness to operate. When you can see the pattern, you can choose not to participate in it. And as this awareness continues growing, several clear signs begin appearing in your life that show just how much your awakening has changed the way influence works around you.
As awakening deepens and awareness continues expanding, one of the first clear signs that manipulation is losing its power over you is the speed at which you begin recognizing certain patterns. In earlier stages of life, emotional dynamics often unfold so quickly that you react before you fully understand what is happening. A comment may trigger guilt, a conversation may create pressure, or someone's disappointment may immediately make you feel responsible for fixing the situation. In those moments, your reaction often comes from habit rather than conscious choice. But when awakening begins reshaping your perception, that automatic reaction slowly disappears. Instead of being pulled instantly into the emotional current of a moment, you begin pausing long enough to observe what is actually taking place. This pause is small, sometimes only a few seconds, but it changes everything. Within that brief space of awareness, patterns that once operated invisibly start revealing themselves.
You begin noticing when someone frames a situation in a way that places blame on you without acknowledging their own role. You recognize when guilt is being used as a tool to push you toward a decision you would not normally make. You start hearing the subtle tone of passive aggression hidden beneath words that appear polite on the surface. These realizations are not dramatic discoveries. They are quiet moments of clarity, where your mind suddenly understands the structure of a dynamic that once felt confusing. One of the most common patterns people begin recognizing during this stage involves guilt-based pressure. In the past, someone might express disappointment in a way that makes you feel immediately responsible for their emotional state. The implication might be subtle, suggesting that if you truly cared, you would behave differently. Before awakening, this kind of message could easily lead to self-doubt and a strong desire to correct the situation as quickly as possible. But once your awareness expands, you start recognizing the difference between genuine communication and emotional pressure disguised as concern. Instead of rushing to resolve the discomfort, you observe the pattern itself. You notice how the conversation attempts to shift responsibility for another person's emotions onto you. That recognition alone interrupts the dynamic, because the moment you see the pattern, it becomes much harder for it to operate the way it once did. Another pattern that becomes clearer involves the subtle attempt to control a narrative. In many interpersonal conflicts, one person may present events in a way that quietly shifts blame or responsibility away from themselves. They may highlight certain details while ignoring others, creating a version of reality that benefits their position. When awareness is limited, this kind of narrative can feel convincing because it arrives with emotional intensity or confident certainty. But awakening sharpens your ability to observe inconsistencies. Instead of accepting the narrative immediately, you begin examining it with calm attention. You notice where facts are missing, where assumptions are being presented as truth, and where emotional pressure is being used to push the conversation in a particular direction. This does not mean you respond with confrontation or hostility. In fact, many chosen ones find that their response becomes quieter,
rather than louder. The key difference is that you are no longer internally confused by the situation. Clarity replaces the emotional fog that once surrounded these interactions. Gaslighting is another dynamic that becomes easier to identify when awareness grows. This tactic often involves someone attempting to make you doubt your perception of events, suggesting that your memory, interpretation, or feelings are somehow incorrect or exaggerated. In earlier stages of life, this can create deep uncertainty, especially if the person presenting the narrative does so with confidence or authority. But once awakening strengthens your self-awareness, you become less dependent on external validation to confirm your experience. You learn to trust your perception and examine conflicting information carefully, rather than immediately assuming you are mistaken. This shift creates a powerful form of psychological stability. Instead of feeling destabilized by conflicting narratives, you observe them calmly and consider whether they align with what you actually experienced. What makes this stage of awakening particularly significant is not simply the ability to recognize manipulation, but the internal change that accompanies it. When these patterns appear, you no longer feel the same urgency to react immediately. You pause. You breathe. You observe the structure of the interaction unfolding in front of you. This pause interrupts the momentum that manipulation often relies on. Emotional tactics frequently depend on speed and intensity, encouraging someone to respond before they have time to think clearly. But awareness slows the process down. And in that slower space, the pattern becomes visible. Many chosen ones eventually realize that recognition itself is one of the most powerful forms of protection. You do not always need to argue against manipulation or prove that it is happening. Simply seeing the pattern clearly changes how you respond to it. Your calm presence and measured reactions remove the leverage that emotional tactics once relied upon. And as this awareness continues strengthening, another transformation begins appearing in your life. Not only do you recognize manipulation more quickly, but you also begin losing the need to explain yourself to everyone around you. As your awareness grows and you become faster at recognizing manipulation patterns, another powerful shift begins taking place within your mindset. Many chosen ones eventually notice that they no longer feel the same urge to explain themselves to everyone around them. In earlier stages of life, it was common to feel responsible for making sure other people understood your intentions, your decisions, and your reasoning. You may have spent a great deal of time trying to clarify your actions, hoping that if you explain things clearly enough, others would accept your choices or at least stop questioning them. This habit often came from a sincere desire to maintain harmony and avoid conflict. If someone seemed upset, confused, or disappointed, you might have felt an immediate need to justify your decision so the tension could disappear. But as awakening continues reshaping your awareness, you begin recognizing something important about this pattern. The need to constantly explain yourself often creates an opening that manipulators can use to maintain influence. When you feel obligated to justify every choice, you unknowingly hand control of the conversation to whoever is questioning you. They can keep asking for more explanation, more detail, or more justification, slowly pulling you into a cycle where your energy is spent defending decisions that never actually required approval in the first place. This dynamic can continue indefinitely because the goal of manipulation is rarely genuine understanding. Instead, it often aims to keep you engaged in a position where you are seeking validation. Once awakening strengthens your sense of internal clarity, that dynamic begins losing its power. You start realizing that not every decision requires explanation. Some choices simply reflect your boundaries, your priorities, or the direction God is guiding you toward. And those choices remain valid, even if someone else disagrees with them. This realization does not mean you become dismissive or unwilling to communicate. Healthy relationships still include open conversation and mutual understanding. The difference is that you no longer feel compelled to defend every personal decision in order to maintain someone else's approval. Your sense of direction begins coming from within, rather than from the reactions of others. One of the first signs of this shift appears in how you respond when someone questions your choices. In the past, you might have immediately launched into a detailed explanation, hoping that the other person would eventually see your perspective. Now your response often becomes simpler and more grounded. You might calmly acknowledge their opinion while still standing by your decision. Instead of feeling anxious about whether they approve, you remain steady in your understanding of why the choice makes sense for your life. This quiet confidence can surprise people who are accustomed to the older version of you. Some may expect the same long explanations they once received, but now they encounter something different: calm boundaries and concise responses. Another important aspect of this transformation is the gradual release of the need for universal agreement. In earlier stages of life, disagreement could feel deeply uncomfortable because it seemed to threaten your sense of acceptance within a relationship or group. If someone did not understand your perspective, it could create the feeling that you had failed to communicate properly. But awakening introduces a deeper level of emotional independence. You begin recognizing that understanding and agreement are not always the same thing. People can understand your decision and still disagree with it, and sometimes they may not fully understand it at all. Yet, your decision can still remain valid. This realization frees you from the exhausting task of trying to control how every person interprets your choices. You begin focusing instead on whether your actions align with your values and the direction your life is moving. Faith often plays a powerful role in this stage of growth. As your connection with God deepens, your sense of identity becomes less dependent on external approval. Instead of constantly asking whether others approve of your path, you begin asking whether your actions align with the principles and purpose that God has placed within you. This shift strengthens your internal foundation, allowing you to stand calmly in decisions that reflect your growth. When your sense of direction comes from that deeper place, criticism or misunderstanding no longer carries the same emotional weight it once did. It simply becomes another perspective rather than a verdict on your choices. Over time, people around you begin noticing that conversations with you feel different. The endless cycles of justification and debate no longer occur. You listen carefully, respond respectfully, and then remain steady in your decision without feeling the need to convince everyone. This calm presence quietly removes a powerful tool that manipulators often rely on. When someone cannot draw you into an endless explanation, they lose the opportunity to twist your words, create doubt, or shift the conversation into confusion. Your clarity keeps the interaction simple and grounded. And as this inner stability continues growing, another noticeable transformation begins appearing in your life. Not only do you stop over-explaining your decisions, but the emotional triggers that once controlled your reactions begin losing their influence as well. As the awakening process continues unfolding and your need for constant explanation fades, another powerful shift begins revealing itself in the way you respond to emotional pressure. One of the clearest signs that manipulation is losing its influence over you is that the emotional triggers that once controlled your reactions no longer have the same effect. In earlier stages of life, certain words, criticisms, or confrontations may have immediately stirred strong emotions within you. An insult could provoke anger, disapproval might trigger anxiety, and someone questioning your character could lead to an intense urge to defend yourself. These reactions were often automatic, happening so quickly that there was little time to pause and reflect before responding. Manipulative individuals frequently rely on this kind of emotional reactivity because it gives them leverage. When someone can predict how you will react emotionally, they can guide the direction of a conversation simply by pressing the right trigger. But awakening gradually changes this dynamic by introducing a deeper level of emotional awareness. Instead of reacting instantly, you begin noticing the emotion itself before acting on it. The moment someone says something provocative or critical, your mind pauses long enough to observe what you are feeling. That small moment of awareness creates a powerful difference. The emotion still appears, but it no longer automatically dictates your behavior. You begin recognizing that feelings can be acknowledged without immediately turning them into reactions. This realization represents a significant step in psychological and spiritual maturity. Emotional discipline does not mean suppressing feelings or pretending they do not exist. Rather, it means understanding that emotions are signals rather than commands. They inform you about what is happening internally, but they do not have to control how you respond externally. As this awareness strengthens, insults or criticism start losing their ability to provoke the same intense reactions they once triggered. Someone may attempt to challenge your confidence or question your choices. Yet, instead of responding defensively, you observe the situation with calm attention. You consider whether the criticism contains any truth that might be useful for growth, and if it does not, you allow it to pass without absorbing it into your identity. This calm response often surprises people who are accustomed to the earlier version of you. Manipulation frequently depends on emotional escalation. When someone expects a strong reaction and instead receives calm observation, the dynamic they rely on begins collapsing. Without emotional fuel, their attempt to control the conversation loses momentum. You are no longer reacting from wounded pride or fear of judgment. Instead, you respond with clarity and intention. This shift is not about becoming emotionally distant or indifferent to others. In fact, many chosen ones find that their compassion actually deepens during this stage of awakening. The difference is that compassion no longer requires absorbing every emotional disturbance that appears around you. You can understand someone's frustration or anger without allowing it to dictate your behavior. This balance between empathy and self-control creates a sense of stability that many people find difficult to shake. Over time, you begin recognizing that emotional discipline also protects your mental clarity. When your reactions are no longer driven by sudden bursts of anger, guilt, or defensiveness, you gain the ability to see situations more accurately. Instead of being swept into conflict, you observe the entire dynamic from a broader perspective. This perspective allows you to recognize when someone is attempting to provoke a reaction intentionally. Sometimes, the tactic may involve criticism, designed to make you feel insecure. Other times, it may involve subtle remarks meant to create frustration or doubt. But once you see the pattern, the emotional hook loses its strength. Your calm response interrupts the cycle that manipulation depends on. Faith often strengthens this emotional stability as well. As your relationship with God deepens, your sense of identity becomes anchored in something more stable than the opinions of others. When your worth is rooted in that deeper foundation, external criticism no longer has the same ability to shake your confidence. You understand that growth sometimes involves feedback and correction, but you also recognize that not every negative comment deserves your emotional investment. This awareness creates a powerful sense of inner peace. Instead of reacting impulsively, you begin choosing your responses carefully. Sometimes, you may address a situation directly with calm honesty. Other times, you may simply observe without engaging at all. The key difference is that the decision now comes from intention rather than emotional impulse. This change gradually becomes visible to the people around you. Conversations that once escalated quickly now remain steady and controlled. Attempts to provoke anger or defensiveness no longer produce the expected reaction. Without emotional leverage, manipulators often find themselves unsure how to continue the interaction. Your calm presence quietly removes the fuel that once powered the dynamic. As this transformation continues, another important shift begins taking shape in your life. Not only do emotional triggers lose their influence, but you also begin establishing boundaries with a sense of calm confidence, protecting your peace in ways that were once difficult to imagine. As emotional triggers lose their power and your responses become calmer and more intentional, another transformation naturally begins taking shape in the life of many chosen ones. The clarity that awakening brings does not only change how you react to manipulation, it also changes how you protect your time, your energy, and your peace. One of the strongest signs that people can no longer manipulate you the way they once did is that you begin setting boundaries without the heavy guilt that once accompanied them. In earlier stages of life, boundaries often felt uncomfortable because they seemed to threaten relationships or create tension with others.
Saying no could feel like rejecting someone. Limiting access to your time might have created anxiety about disappointing people. Because of this, many individuals tolerated situations that drained them emotionally, simply to maintain harmony. Manipulators often rely on this discomfort with boundaries because it gives them space to push further than they normally would. If someone knows you struggle to say no, they may repeatedly test your limits until you give in out of guilt or obligation.
But awakening gradually changes this dynamic by strengthening your awareness of what truly belongs within your responsibility and what does not. You begin realizing that protecting your time and energy is not selfish. It is necessary for maintaining a healthy and balanced life. Boundaries are no longer seen as barriers against others, but as structures that protect your focus and well-being. Instead of feeling guilty when you decline something that does not align with your priorities, you begin responding with quiet confidence. You may still communicate respectfully, but the long explanations and apologies that once accompanied your boundaries begin disappearing. A simple and calm response becomes enough. This change often surprises people who are accustomed to the earlier version of you. In the past, they may have expected negotiation or emotional persuasion to eventually change your decision. Now they encounter something different: calm firmness. Your boundary is not delivered with anger or hostility. It is simply clear and steady. This calm approach is powerful because it removes the emotional drama that manipulators sometimes rely on. Without the opportunity to provoke guilt or confusion, their influence weakens. Over time, people begin understanding that your limits are real and consistent. They may not always agree with them, but they recognize that pressure will no longer change your decision. Alongside the development of boundaries, another deeper shift begins emerging within your priorities. As awakening continues, shaping your perspective, inner peace gradually becomes more important to you than external approval. In earlier stages of life, acceptance from others may have carried significant weight. Being liked, understood, or included could feel essential for maintaining a sense of belonging. Because of this, it was often tempting to tolerate conflict, manipulation, or emotional pressure simply to preserve that acceptance. But awakening reveals how costly that pattern can be. Constantly chasing approval often requires sacrificing your own clarity and well-being. When your peace depends on whether others approve of your choices, your emotional stability becomes vulnerable to their reactions. As your awareness deepens, you begin recognizing that true stability cannot be built on that kind of foundation. Instead, you start prioritizing the calm clarity that comes from living in alignment with your values and your spiritual path. This shift does not mean you stop caring about relationships or become disconnected from others. Rather, it means your sense of peace no longer depends on constant agreement or validation. You can appreciate supportive relationships while still maintaining your independence of thought and direction. When conflicts arise, you evaluate whether the situation contributes to growth or simply drains your energy. If it becomes clear that an interaction exists only to create unnecessary tension or drama, you may choose not to engage in it at all. This decision often surprises people who expect every disagreement to turn into a prolonged debate. Instead of participating in cycles of argument or emotional escalation, you step back and preserve your mental clarity. Faith frequently plays a central role in strengthening this commitment to peace. When your sense of identity becomes rooted in your relationship with God, external approval loses much of its influence. You understand that your purpose and direction are not determined by the shifting opinions of those around you. This understanding allows you to move through life with a quiet confidence that does not require constant validation. As a result, attempts to manipulate you through guilt, pressure, or emotional conflict become far less effective. People can only control what they are able to disturb. When your peace becomes your priority, the leverage they once held disappears. Over time, this transformation becomes visible in how you carry yourself. Your words remain calm, your boundaries remain steady, and your reactions remain thoughtful rather than impulsive. Situations that once created confusion or emotional turbulence now pass through your life without the same disruption. Manipulation no longer finds easy entry into your decisions because the foundation of your mindset has changed. Awareness allows you to recognize unhealthy dynamics. Emotional discipline allows you to respond with clarity, and strong boundaries protect the peace you have worked so hard to build. When these qualities come together, a powerful form of freedom appears. You are no longer moving through life, reacting to every external pressure.
Instead, you move with intention, guided by awareness, discipline, and the deeper sense of purpose that awakening has placed within you. If you've started noticing these changes in your life, it may be a sign that your awareness has truly grown. When manipulation no longer works on you, it means something inside you has become stronger and clearer. You have developed the ability to see patterns, control your reactions, and protect your peace. That kind of growth does not happen by accident. Often, it is part of a deeper transformation that God is guiding you through. Stay aware, stay grounded, and continue protecting the clarity you've built. And if this message resonates with your journey, comment "aware" below.